Hi everyone. We are here with two of my colleagues from GreenSky. I'm your host, Moien Giashi. In this episode, we're going to talk about deep tech companies, what we call at GreenSky deep tech, and essentially how we evaluate deep tech companies. I want to pass it on to my colleagues, Valdis and Neil, to introduce themselves first, and then we can dive deeper into the conversation. Valdis, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Thank you, Moan. I'm Valdis Martinsons. I went through engineering science at U of T and did a master's in digital hardware and software as well as an MBA. My career started off in the auto industry at the world's biggest bumper manufacturer, where for 8 years I was responsible for anything and everything to do with technology. So robotics, automation, press controls, die protection, all the computer systems, EDI, barcoding. So really anything that touched computers and tech. After that, I went to ATI, which is now AMD, which is was at the time the world's biggest graphics computer company, and I was responsible for all the IT systems to support 2,500 engineers globally, 5 locations, doing designs of both hardware and software, drivers for laptops as well as computers, as well as working with foundries in Taiwan to actually make the chips. After that, I was recruited by RIM, Research in Motion, BlackBerry Today, and I was the first C-level hire there. I was a CTO and basically running all the BlackBerry operations. So had to scale BlackBerry itself from 2 paging networks to 200 carriers around the world, working out all the problems, putting data on those networks. We were the first really in the world that had to sort out how data would be transferred through standard communication networks over the air. Also responsible for all the IT and all the facilities management. After that, I basically worked with Richard Branson. I was hired number 2 at Virgin Mobile Canada, helped start it, had to build out the infrastructure, working closely with Bell. Since Bell was a parent, one of the owners of Virgin Mobile, launched it across Canada and then scaled it to basically all of Canada to before it was bought. At the end, we were so successful that Bell had a plan to buy us after 4 or 5 years, but they ended up actually purchasing Virgin Mobile after 3 years. And then the last 10 years or so, I've been working with startups, mentoring CEOs and CTOs on how to build out technical products, anything engineering related, anything software or hardware, how to actually execute on their design and development plans, how to scale it out and launch it into market, successfully support it as it scales.
And Valdis, how long have you been with GreenSky?
I've been with GreenSky almost 10 years since the first start of the first fund, working with Mike and Greg from the very start to basically look at all our investments. So I've been involved in every fund along the way, in every investment.
Awesome. And Neil, pass it on to you.
Yeah, it's always hard to follow an introduction like that. Um, so my background is a little more focused on the business side of deeper technologies. I did go to school of computer science, and I started coding. I was a Microsoft certified hardware engineer at age 14, and I started coding when HTML1 was released. So I do have, a little bit of legitimacy in the software development space. I did launch a software company myself. We started doing actual band websites, to be honest, for a lot of the punk bands in the 90s. So like Goldfinger and never did Sum 41, but a lot of, actually, no, we did Sum 41, but not some of the other ones. But anyways, really good kind of exposure for me. And that company ended up folding because we got into custom software. And when SurveyMonkey came out, which did a very similar solution to us, we couldn't compete with a free business model. But several of my friends bought me out, and they still actually run it as a custom dev shop here in Canada. I then did an undergrad at Western in business and a master's in business or an MBA at Rotman, and worked for several years as an international strategy consultant, mainly helping deeper technology or more traditional industries think strategically long term. So up to 30-year time horizons. It's actually called scenario planning. It's a methodology that was developed by Shell, and funny enough, works pretty well when you're working with startups. You need to think long term in the future as well. So my role here at GreenSky is primarily looking at blending kind of the, what software platform, what tools and customer supporting aspects need to be in place for technology companies, but also looking to the future to see what kind of things might be important to consider for the company's success, both in the market as well as in their customer base. Last but not least, my role here at GreenSky is mainly to provide interesting mugs for situations like this or on Zoom calls with founders.
Awesome. Thank you both for the intro. So this episode, we want to dive deeper into how we look into deep tech companies, and I know different people describe deep tech differently. I guess at GreenSky, we look into companies that have a specific moat, whether it's an intellectual property, data, know-how, and expertise of the founders in a specific field that takes time to build and gather. And so this could be a software as a service company. This could be a hardware software combination. It could be an advanced materials. And again, the idea for us, whether a company is deep tech or not, is essentially that moat and that differentiation. And so, Neil, I want to ask you about one of the main things that we look into when evaluating deep tech companies, which is a team. That's essentially one of the competencies that we try to evaluate when we talk to deep tech companies. How do you evaluate that? You are the kind of the intake lead at the GreenSky. What are you looking for when you're talking to deep tech founders?
Yeah, I mean, it's always an interesting question, right? Do you betting on the jockey, or you're betting on the horse, or you're betting on the whole race? And when it comes to deep tech, you're right. It's part of the reason we're attracted to it and like it is, I mean, number one, here in Canada, we have amazing research. We do an excellent job both supporting it, but also attracting really smart, high quality folks, whether it be, through our universities or even through the immigration policies that we have. Done a great job at kind of building these, centers of excellence, certainly, but often just really innovative research labs where people can build fundamental research that can help develop other things. The classic example, AI, a lot of the building blocks of AI are birthed in Canada based on that kind of really strong research environment. So part of what we're looking for is, do you have that deep expertise? Do you have that, whether it's the brilliance or the passion or kind of an understanding of what's happening in that technology space? And then the second question is, that's great for research, but, are we able to then see how that translates into the market? And, sometimes that doesn't always happen, but it's still interesting and worth taking a look at. For example, there was a while here in Canada where there's a lot of really interesting research in FPGA chips, and a couple groups had developed some really novel conceptual ways to update FPGA chips. Well, they're never going to take that to market because, as Valdis knows, scaling up chip production is a massive enterprise. Well, I don't expect the founder to have that kind of expertise, but can they demonstrate that they've been able to validate their claims, 25% faster, cheaper, stronger, better, whatever it is, they've been able to show that in a real world setting? Have they been able to take that kind of validation and turn that into someone's sort of not only acknowledgement of that value, but willingness to pay for that value? Now, that's not always cash. Sometimes it's time and energy and effort or access to other resources. But there really does need to be a demonstration that the founder can validate research in such a way in a real world setting that it demonstrates value, that a customer is willing to pay for that in a real tangible way. That would be kind of that really important first hurdle. After that, and often it ties together quite nicely, is really looking at the team's kind of leadership potential, ability to then, we're now going to be investing in that team. And it's not always just one person, but we'd like to be able to give those people resources to scale up both their technology development, their technology deployment, but also hiring, coaching, building out other people who can at some level help to replicate some of what I just talked about, going out to the market, demonstrating that value, and having a customer then in return really, really desire that product and be willing to pay for it. Finally, and this is really specific to technology and deep tech, are they able to then keep kind of improving, pushing that boundary to be able to enter ancillary markets, to add ancillary products? And again, that FPGA example is a good one where, you build this conceptual design for a new way of approaching a chip. That's kind of a one-shot pony. Once that works, Intel buys it, they go and they manufacture it, or Amazon develops it for their data centers, and you're done. Not that that's necessarily a bad outcome, but if we're looking to build a really big opportunity from a foundational technology, we'd love to see an entrepreneur who can not only get that into market, but also keep kind of adding additional value to that technology base.
Right. And so to sum it up, we want to evaluate whether they have the technical expertise to develop a technology, run the R&D, and build the product. We want to make sure that they have the leadership and business skill set to be able to actually scale up the business side, and then continuing and improving on the business and the technology as a whole as they move forward.
And obviously, there are certain aspects of that we can build an ecosystem of support around. We're not expecting one person to magically do all those things. So an important part of that during the process of due diligence, of even just engaging with founders, is things like coachability. How do we work together? Being faced with a really tough situation. But at some level, I'm really looking for someone that I can equip with a lot of resources, often money, but other things as well, and be comfortable and confident that they're going to take that and turn that into results. And so that can vary from business to business, but what you described, those sort of three aspects are really important.
But yeah, before maybe jumping to the question, Valdis, I think your experience with fundraising for your own technology, kind of coming across GreenSky and joining GreenSky, has informed how GreenSky really does the specifically technical due diligence and the overall due diligence process. Why don't you share with us your journey, how you joined GreenSky, and your experience on that side?
Okay. Yeah, it is an interesting story. So I was part of a startup where we were the first ones in the world to actually be able to load credit cards on a smartphone and be able to do transactions. We had actually patents issued in the US and Canada for that. And during the process of building that company, I was looking for funding. So I had actually gone and seen many VCs in Canada and US, many other sources of funding, probably around 50 companies. Every time we went through and did the presentation on what we were actually proposing and what our product did and how it worked, all these companies that claimed to be in the technology space and investing in technology were blank faced. They didn't understand really what we were talking about. When we said, well, can we talk to some of your technical people? And they said, we are the technical people. We are the ones who evaluate technology. And we've actually invested in quite a few technology companies, deep tech. They called them deep tech as well. Yet they had no clue what we were talking about. So it was surprising at the end. Before GreenSky even started, Greg and Mike were already together. They're the founders of GreenSky. And the last sort of presentation was to them. Went through exactly the same, our technology, what we did, how it worked. We demonstrated how we could do payments on the smartphone, how we had patents on it, and it was the same. They didn't understand how it's possible or really understand what we were doing. And having, both Greg and Mike wanting to understand and start these funds, I said, well, one of the things that I think you have to understand if you're actually going to be investing in technology and deep tech, so you have to have somebody on board who actually can evaluate what the deep tech is, does it even work, and does it make sense to actually invest in it? And they both very much agreed, and that's how I actually ended up joining GreenSky and helped start the first fund, because they acknowledged that in the investment community there are very few and far between people, and very few people who are actually part of funding companies, venture companies, who actually understand technology itself, who have had an operational experience in technical firms, and have actually scaled a company and executed successfully. So that was the journey on getting into GreenSky.
Great, and I think that definitely has informed the way we design our due diligence process. And going back to that kind of technical due diligence, you every time you and I we kind of go through the technical due diligence with the startup companies that we want to invest in. You obviously have a lot of questions that you ask them. I've heard from a lot of them that a lot of the questions would help them further develop and kind of put together their technology. But I wanted to ask you, maybe just to go back to the question, to share what are the main things that you ask them? What are the main things that you look into when you're evaluating the tech?
So, so really three things. So on the feasibility side, one of the things I look at is from a technical and scientific standpoint, is the idea even possible? There's a lot of people who come up with ideas and in the lab or on paper they should work, or when they do a small scale model, they seem to work. But from physics principles, many times these things are not possible to even scale, or the ability to actually execute on it from the feasibility side is nearly impossible. So it's really looking at the from the technical and scientific standpoint whether what they are doing conceptually can even work and be scaled. Is a product a laboratory experiment? Is it right now still in the lab and they're playing around, or have they even taken the product or whatever they're developing to the point where it can be commercialized? Or are there too many uncertainties still that they got to solve in a laboratory setting? Another thing I look at is what is the path to commercialization? Is it simply an engineering exercise, meaning that if you do step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you will get there and have a product? Or do they still have a lot of technical uncertainty and scientific uncertainty they got to solve that never has been done before, means that there's a lot more risk involved and they may not even get there? And then thirdly, on the feasibility, does it actually solve a real world problem? It's nice that people invent things, but if it's not solving a real world problem or something that hasn't previously been addressed already, if it's already been addressed, they better be solving it in a better way, a more efficient way, something that basically is a reason why the world will buy their product or their offering versus what others have already done. Then there's the scalability side I look at. Does a product or service actually scale cost effectively? And that includes various aspects. One is deployment. Once you start having tens of thousands and millions, a lot of the stuff I had to scale up from ATI or RIM, BlackBerry as we scale around the world, can you deploy it in a self-service or automated fashion? Or will it scale linearly with people, meaning that it will never be cost effective and you're actually going to be spending a lot of money just to get it out in the market? Also, from the manufacturing standpoint, are you actually using products that are standard off the shelf components and are readily sourced, or are they hard to come by? Obviously, there's going to be often custom or proprietary components that you have invented, the founders have figured out. Those may be different, but they usually include a lot of standard off the shelf products, or should. And can you readily source them and manufacture them in-house or outside and control the quality and make sure you have consistent good quality? Because as you scale, it's nice when you're in the lab and you produce one or two and you can control the quality. But when you're making tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands, or in the software world, when you're having many customers use it, you got to make sure the quality is there. Otherwise, there's going to be a lot of rejects or returns, or the customer won't want to continue to use it. Then from the deployment side and the support requirements, once it's deployed, what are the requirements on an ongoing basis? They better be minimal and they will be cost effective or scalable at cost effectively. So you shouldn't have to have an army of customer support people who are supporting that product. It's got to be very much self-supporting or minimal, or you can support it online in an automated fashion. Is the solution also readily extendable? Meaning, when you have an initial product, it may solve a certain niche market, certain functionality, but you got to make sure it was built a certain way that if you actually want to extend that product so that it solves a bigger problem or generates incremental revenue for it, can you easily add a piece to it? Can you easily scale it some way, whether it's vertically or horizontally when you're scaling it, or from a software point of view, adding new features, functions? And then does the team have individuals who have actually scaled a product? through substantial commercial growth, which is very different than you playing around, call it in the scientific world, in a lab. So you have to understand the operational and the commercial execution capabilities. And then the unit economics. It all comes down to the unit economics. If you can't manufacture it and support it, so it becomes profitable down the road and attains profitability in some reasonable period of time, it might be a great idea, but it's not investable.
Great.
Funny enough, one of the things that a lot of founders come back and talk to us about is, honestly, just the basics, wanting to be a team that actually has a chance to go through and look at the product, to use the product, and then, lift the hood and understand what's actually going on with the innovation or the technology itself. And, that doesn't take a lot of effort, but it does take some intentionality. And, to Valdis's point, there's a bunch of specific things we're looking at, but it helps for us greatly to at least understand the basics of how it's put together and kind of how it functions.
Awesome. Neil, I guess back to you on the business side. One of the things that we obviously always look into is the market size. And again, on the deeper tech side, we see a lot of companies that have patent. They probably have a niche solution for a niche market. How do we evaluate that? Like, would that be a fit? Do we always look for like $1 trillion markets, or like a smaller niche market is also of interest? How do we evaluate that when you're going through the lead intake process?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, and I think it's something that is helpful for founders to look at a little bit early in the process. Venture capital is not the only option, right? Like, venture capital is sort of very high risk capital designed to help companies that are looking either they're really strongly weighted on the risk side, which many early businesses are, but also that the opportunity side is kind of commensurate with that risk. And so, starting a restaurant has a massive chance of failure, but even if you succeed in your restaurant, it's not really a good fit for venture capital. It might be a really good business, but it's not necessarily a good fit for venture capital. And so this is where the market sizing question kind of helps you, maybe as a founder, to get a better sense of, of who you should be talking to. And so two of the things we look at, one is yes, just overall market size. And the rationale here is, I mean, if it's a big enough market and you're disrupting that large market, you have an opportunity to become a large player. Even if you don't win 100% of the market, which, just to clarify, you're never going to win 100% of the market. You have a much more significant, a chance to be a much more significant player. That being said, the value of the market is an important aspect to this. There's many markets where there's thousands of potential customers. Like a classic one nowadays would be like security cameras. I think there's estimated to be 1 trillion security cameras around the world. Well, that's great, but if you're just targeting security cameras, the odds of you resonating with a use case or a customer group well enough to actually make a dent in that is pretty low, especially with a disruptive and innovative technology. So here, the corollary to the market size, there's two specific ones. One is the value of each specific opportunity. So is it a large opportunity where the value of what you're bringing is very high? That would be a great fit. Is it there's a fewer number of customers, but again, that value is very high per customer, and you're so disruptive that the odds are much more in your favor that once you start gaining momentum, you're going to take over a larger percentage of that market. Or is it a huge, a larger market at a lower price point, but it's again compelling such that you don't need to make as many inroads into that market to really build a good business. So the corollary is twofold. One is the growth rate of that market. So again, going back to security cameras, if you come to me a couple of years ago, maybe, yes, a generic security camera approach might make sense because the market is growing so dramatically. At this point, we're more talking about security cameras again, where not that the market is saturated per se, but you're more looking to update and expand and better iterate or focus on your use case as a customer or a user of security cameras. So your product better match with that. You can't just generically target it. And if the market is growing really rapidly, that will obviously help you, but it means that people are now actively looking to invest in that market. So there's a capital focus there, there's a customer focus there that helps you as a startup looking to disrupt that market. The second corollary is really more focused on this idea of now I have a specific use case or specific technology. Often that's a more specific vertical. And so there, what we often ask our founders to think through is, to Valdis's point, what are the unit economics? So, for example, I can help provide, it's a relatively small vertical. And again, it's growing. It's an interesting market, but it's a small vertical. But if I can get into that vertical with my technology, well, then I'm not only providing this product, I'm also maybe layering on top of that a service, and there's a new process or way in which the customer would work. And now I'm part of that new process, gives you a lot of opportunity to get deeper within that vertical market. Classic example here, you provide some sort of payment processing technology. Not only are you providing a software tool, you're also getting a percentage of every transaction that's done. And then as you kind of help the customer expand the number of transactions they can process online, your kind of slice of the pie just goes up as their use of the product and use of that technology solution goes up. And there's lots of examples of this in very specific niche industries. The classic idea of like a razor blade model where you're selling maybe a repeatable aspect of your technology, or the payment example where you help them to do more payments online. That also benefits you as well. That would be kind of a second way to look at the market. If neither of those things are true, again, it could still be a very good business. And we've had examples of this where, for example, in the fiber optic space, where companies developed really interesting fiber optic sensors, very applicable in a small specific niche. We sort of said to them, if you can win in that niche, you might have an excellent multi-million-dollar business, but not a venture capital business. But if you can execute in that space and then transition into much broader spaces where there's competitive technologies, but yours is now kind of validated, then it becomes an interesting venture opportunity.
Well, thank you so much for that, Neil. And yeah, there you have it, folks. We talked about how GreenSky evaluates deep tech. We went through how we look into the team, how we look deeper into the technology, and then as well market. For our next episode with Neil and Valdis, we want to dive a bit deeper on how we price the risk when we evaluate a deep tech investment opportunity. So please stay with us for the next episode.